Hey everybody, welcome to episode 4 of Beach Walk Blog, where I go for a walk on the beach and I talk to you about stuff related to running. So today I wanted to talk to you about the Sling Method. Woohoo! And I wanted to talk to you about why it's different from other things that are out there, other things that you might have done, other things that you might have thought, yeah, that's good for running. And it might not necessarily be bad for running, but it might not be beneficial and actually positively affecting your running. Now, let's start by saying, what is the Sling Method all about? Well, the Sling Method is all about running. It's all about the gait cycle and the forces, the kinetics of the gait cycle. So when you run, you are moving horizontally across the earth. There's a little bit of vertical oscillation, and that's something that is actually beneficial. It's something that can't be avoided, and you wouldn't want to avoid it, even if you could, because it's beneficial. It gets you some flight time, it gets you some air time, it creates your stride length. So the gait cycle, when you run, when you walk, is generally speaking a horizontal based activity. It's a horizontal based force. And the structure of the movements that go into the gait cycle are very much horizontally force based. They're rotational movements. Your torso is rotating side to side. It's rocking side to side. It's rotating left to right, counterclockwise, clockwise. And your pelvis is doing the same thing. It's going in all three planes of motion during your gait cycle, as is your foot, as is your hip. So there's a lot of things that are moving in the horizontal plane of motion. So really what we want to do is we want to focus most of our attention to the horizontal plane, the horizontal force plane. Now, obviously, of course, running is standing up. It's never laying down. And as we know from previous blogs and previous posts that I've done, strength is specific to the action, to the force vector, horizontal, vertical, like I was just talking about. It's specific to the muscles involved. It's specific to whether the muscle contraction is isometric, eccentric or concentric, and the range of motion as well, whether it's on one leg or two legs. All those things come into play. So when I created the Sling Method, it was all about exercising in as much relevance, as much specificity to how we produce force during the gait cycle, and specifically running. So it was all based in the horizontal force plane, and it's all based in rotational movement, and it's based on centrifugal and centripetal forces. Those are outward forces that where we have to create an inward force against them, because every action has to have an equal and opposite reaction. So these are all things that were taken into account with the Sling Method and the creation of the Sling Method. The other thing that I took into account, and I wanted to take into account, of course, was injured runners. And injured runners need help. They need a starting point, and that starting point must be the gait cycle, because when you're injured, we get given a ton of exercises that we can do, and yet we still can't run without pain or without injury, without the injury hindering us. Okay, so you've got to think that, are those things that we can do, if we can do it, then they're not the same as the thing that we can't do, right? So let's think about squats. If I'm an injured runner and I can only run a mile, and then I pull up lame and I'm injured and it hurts, everything hurts, you could still drop down and probably do 10, 20, 50 squats. Or you could still load up your back with some weights and do squats. So that in itself shows you that the demand of that movement is different to running. Because if you can do it without pain, and yet you can't run without pain, that's showing you that the movement, the demand, everything about it is different. It's kind of obvious, really, isn't it? If I do one thing and it gives me pain, Therefore, if I do something else and it doesn't give me pain, it can't be the same thing, because if it was the same thing, it'd be giving me the same pain, right? So what I did was I dissected the Gait Cycle into its pieces and then created horizontal force-based exercises using resistance bands, because resistance bands can give you any force that you want in any different way, any different location, any different dynamic setup, horizontal, vertical, diagonal, whatever you want. They can give you all of that. Whereas when you work with weights, it's only ever in the vertical plane. So it can only ever give you one thing. Now, yeah, you can swing weights around a little bit, and that's one of the parts of the Sling Method as well, the centrifugal force training. But again, we'll come to that later. So I had to give runners a start point. Now, if you're injured, the chances are you've probably got some restricted tissues, and from previous blogs we know that stretching isn't going to fix that, probably going to make it worse, probably going to make the damage long term. So the first thing that we want to do, what's the first thing you do when you fall over and you hurt yourself? You rub it. Well, that's the basis of MFR. You're rubbing it. You're doing it slightly more calculated and slightly more specific, but you're rubbing it. That's what you're doing. You're rubbing it. You go to a sports massage therapist and they rub it, right? I do that as well. I am a sports massage therapist. I've been doing it for 20 years. I rub stuff. That's what I do, and that's what we all do if we want to make it as basic as possible, as simplified as possible. So we rub stuff, we massage it, we MFR, and that's the first part of the runner's rehab, is doing all the MFR. Now, what does MFR do? Well, it changes the input to the brain, and we talked about this in the last blog. We change the input to the brain, so we decrease tissue tension, we talk to the nervous system and say, hey, relax, chill out a little bit. And what that does is it changes the range of motion, it decreases the tissue restriction, decreases the adhesions. There's some things that we don't know that it does, but it does it. And that allows us to create a change in the sensory inputs to the brain. And those changes in the sensory inputs to the brain allow us to maybe move a little bit differently, just a little bit differently, and they can reduce the pain. And if we reduce the tissue sensitivity, we reduce the restrictions, we can increase the range of motion. But then we have to teach the new range of motion to the nervous system to teach it that this is okay now, this is actually improved, and you don't have to guard me anymore going through this range of motion. So with the MFR, we cover as much of the body as possible, and we really kind of get into places that maybe you didn't even know existed, areas that you might have maybe a little bit of movement amnesia to as well. You might not even know that you can move in this way, or you might not know that you need to move in this particular way. So with the MFR, we change the tissue tension, we change the inputs to the nervous system, we change a little bit of the availability of what you've got, the range of motion of what you've got. And then with the runner's rehab exercises, so there's the runner's rehab, the MFR, there's the runner's rehab, the exercises. Those are the resistance band exercises that we use the loop bands for. We retrain your nervous system into new patterns of movement, into posture, into different postures. Again, these are things that you probably haven't used in many years maybe, or maybe you've, like I said before, got a little bit of selective movement amnesia and you don't know these movements exist, you don't know how your pelvis moves, and we're trying to gain that range of motion by putting resistance to these movements, which makes it so that your brain and your nervous system has to work in order to gain access to these positions. So what we do is we try and stack the posture. We try and stack it so that it's all in the right place, it's all vertically stacked, and that's the most efficient place for it to be. That's why your head's on top of your shoulders, or on top of your spine, should I say, your cervical spine on top of the thoracic spine, thoracic on top of the lumbar on top of the sacrum, pelvis where it is, and we want this neutral pelvis to be the most efficient we can be. Because if we move with an efficient global posture, it's the efficient global posture that allows us to move in the most efficient, economical way, and with the most with the least stress to the to the system, it allows it to work really well. So that's what we do with the runner's rehab. We put it all into a position and we train the length tension relationships at the joints. So we resituate the pelvis, take it out of the anterior tilt, and we retension it. I call it retensioning. I tension it back to where we want it to be. And we do that up and down the body. So ankles, feet, a little bit at the knees, loads of work at the hips, at the pelvis, some work at the lumbar spine, some work at the thoracic spine, at the shoulder joint, at the cervical spine, the head, the neck, and when we put it all together. And then what we do with the basic 8, those are 8 specific exercises that teach you how to move differently and retrain your movement, so that when you come to putting it all together with the running drills, you can move better, more efficiently. And that is what we do with the runner's rehab and the basic 8. Now, where there's no exercising laying down on your back or on your front, so prone or supine. There's no exercises whatsoever in the runner's rehab and the basic 8, or in fact any of the Sling Method, where you're laying down. You're always standing upright, because strength is specific to that position. Now think about a bench press. If I lay on a bench, I do a bench press. I used to be able to bench press 280 pounds for repetitions, but there's no way that I could do a pressing action with 280 pounds of force if I haven't got something supporting my back and my entire spine, like a bench, right? If I'm standing up, and I'm going to get my shadow if I can. There's my shadow. Now if I'm standing up and I'm doing this movement forwards and backwards with my arms, there is no way that I could push 280 pounds of force and not get thrown backwards, right? Because there's no way I could generate that amount of force in my legs, in my hamstrings and my calves. There's no way I could generate that amount of force. So doing a bench press with 280 pounds doesn't really benefit me in my gait cycle, because it never happens, because I can't support that. So again, strength is specific to the movement, okay? Specific to the situation that the movement occurs in. So why would I do any exercises laying down on my back, supine, laying down on my back, or why would I do any exercises prone, face down? Because that never occurs when I'm running. So yeah, I might get stronger in that position, but it won't transfer over to running, because I can't produce that force, the same force, when I'm standing up. So it's just not relevant. So, and this is one of the problems, is that yeah, we might get really, really strong in one area, in one part of our body, but we can't use that strength when it comes to running, because the rest of our body is maybe lagging behind. Or we get really great at doing a movement like a squat or a leg press or whatever, but it's on 2 feet and it's pushing downwards, it's pushing force away, not driving force backwards into the ground. Remember, a squat and a leg press are both vertical loaded forces, so you're pushing down, you're pushing away from your pelvis downwards, or in a leg press you're probably pushing upwards, but it's still vertically in the same situation as when you would be standing, right? You're pushing downwards into the ground. Well, when you're running, you're grabbing the ground and pushing it backwards, pulling it backwards, pushing it backwards. You're not doing a leg press, you're not doing a squat, so all the levers are different, okay? So nothing in the Sling Method is laying down on your back or laying on your front. Nothing, because it has to be relative to the movement of gait, horizontal, rotational movement in all 3 planes of motion with different parts of the body. Okay, so that is the big difference there. So you're also doing pretty much everything unilaterally, one-sided. So you train one side of the body or one direction of movement, and then you train the other direction of movement. Okay, so not like doing a row, two-handed row in the gym where you just kind of pull. There's my shadow again. You kind of just pull both arms towards you like this. You know, you'd be kind of doing that movement, right? No, with the Sling Method, it's push and pull like that. Okay, so you pull one arm, you push the other, because that's what happens when you run. You pull one side, you push the other. They're both pulling actions from an anatomical perspective and a biomechanical perspective, but what you see is a pull and a push, right? So yeah, it's all standing up. Everything's got to be standing up, so it doesn't create weak links like traditional vertical training does. It creates weak links. Okay, so the Sling Method is different to everything else out there. We use totally different pieces of equipment. In fact, most of the Sling Method just uses resistance bands. So the Runner's Rehab, the Basic 8, the Intermediate 10, the Rotational Torque Training, they all use resistance bands, purely using resistance bands with horizontal forces, because that's what you need to be better at doing, producing more horizontal force. Now when you get to the Intermediate 10, we do some squatting movements, but we do them with a difference. We do them with resistance bands and not vertically. They're still challenged horizontally. You might be thinking, well, how the hell does that work? Well, if you get the Intermediate 10, you'll find out. They're called anti-gravity squat and the anti-gravity deadlift. They're different. They're the opposite of a squat and a deadlift. Same movement, but with the resistance in the opposite direction. Yeah, kind of fun, huh? So there's so many differences, and that's why when people say, oh, but I've tried everything, what makes the Sling Method different? The answer to that question is literally everything is different. Literally everything is different. Okay, so you're gonna become your own best massage therapist. You're gonna become your own best postural expert. I'll help you, of course, as well. Then you're going to become your own best movement coach, because you'll find out that when you do something with your right arm and then you do it with your left arm, or you do something where you're standing on your right leg and then you do something where you're standing on your left leg, you're going to be amazed at the difference between what you're capable of doing with one side of your body and what you're not capable of doing with the other side of your body. So it's very different. All right, we're not training balance, we're training movement. So some people have said, oh, but I do balance exercises. I don't do balance exercises because gait is not balanced. How am I balanced when I'm running? If I was balanced, I wouldn't be going anywhere, because balance means that you're not moving. Right? Think it through, think about it. Balance means that both sides are doing the same thing. So you're in balance. It's like balancing your bank account, balancing your checkbook, etc., etc. It's all in balance. Well, running isn't like that, otherwise I wouldn't be moving. It's one-sided force, one-sided force, one-sided force, one-sided force. It's always switching from one side to the other, or one direction to the other. So it's not balanced. So all those balancing exercises that you might have done, they are pointless. They're a waste of time, and that's why we don't do them in the Sling Method, because they don't work. My foot, think about how your foot moves. It pronates, then it supinates. Okay? It pronates, then it supinates. So you've got to create that specific rigid lever after you've created or you've gone through your pronation movement. You have to go back to supination. Balance exercises don't teach you that, whereas the Sling Method does. Right? These are all things that you'll learn when you start getting into it and you start doing it. So it's very different. It's very, very different. It's all different. Everything about it is different. We do nothing face down. We don't stretch. We don't do tons of squats. We're not worried about how strong you are in a vertical way with weights. What we care about is your movement patterns. We care about how you move. We care about how effective your internal rotation of your hip is. We care about how your feet move. We work on splaying the toes out. We work on your torso movement, because that's where the movement of gait initiates, is with the torso lateral flexion and the rotation. And if you can't laterally flex and rotate very well, i.e. your spine doesn't move very well and your torso, your rib cage is all restricted, then your movement isn't going to be very good. So your legs are probably going to overwork, and you're going to get loads of overuse injuries in your legs because they're having to do so much extra work. And B, you can't breathe very well. if you can't breathe very well, you're going to have to work much harder to expand your lungs and get that air in. And that's the most important thing, aside from the movement, of course. Breathing is so important. So if you're having to work harder to breathe, you're having to work to send blood, extra blood to those breathing muscles, because you're having to work so hard just to expand and open your ribs. So we work to improve all the shoulder mechanics as well. That's another thing that we do. You won't find that in other systems out there, in other training methods, working to improve your breathing mechanics. Stop belly breathing, that's a whole nother thing, right? Anyway, so then we get to the intermediate 10. So quickly just talk about the basic 8. The basic 8 is all the movements of half of a gait cycle. So we're teaching you how to put together half of a gait cycle. We're teaching you how to get from supination to pronation to supination. We're teaching you how to paw the ground, pawing the ground, to pull the ground backwards to drive you forwards. Right? We're not squatting, we're not going up and down. We're pulling the ground backwards to go forwards. That's what we're doing in running. We're rotating the torso. So we teach all of those things in the basic 8. And when you get to the intermediate 10, you're starting to increase the number of gait cycles, or you're putting together the two halves of one gait cycle with multiple steps and multiple gait cycles. And then you start to add in internal, or more internal, and also external rotation movements. So more like a throwing movement. And again, these will really help you with your shoulder mechanics. If you're a triathlete and you're stuck on a bike for 5, 6, 7, 10, 12 hours a week, your shoulder mechanics, even though you swim, are probably not going to be as good as they could be. So with the intermediate 10, we start to work on more of those things, and we also start to speed it up. So when we get to the end of the intermediate 10, we're doing a little bit of plyometric based work, speed of movement work, plyometric and speed of movement work, and we're also putting exercises together as well, so multiple exercises together. Okay, so then we go to the rotational torque training, and we start to add in levers, external levers. So things like hitting a baseball, hitting a tennis ball, a lacrosse swing, throwing a lacrosse ball with a lacrosse stick, tennis serve. Those are kind of movements that we use. We use those kind of movements. We don't do them with a tennis racket or a lacrosse stick or a baseball bat or whatever, but we use the movements with a torque bar. And we do one-sided resistance, and we start to teach how to do more of the lever actions involved in the thoracic spine, the shoulder girdle, the shoulder joint, and we match those off with the pelvis, etc, etc. So we do loads of that stuff with the rotational torque training. And there's probably, I don't know, upwards of 100 exercises that I've come up with using that torque bar. But in the book there's 3 sections of 8 exercises, and there's 24 in total. Okay, 3 sections of 8, and it's really cool. It's a really great selection of exercises, changing the standing positions into a staggered stance, from a side-by-side foot stance, changes everything. There's some really cool exercises in there, and if you're a triathlete, they're really going to help you with that shoulder girdle, shoulder joint, thoracic spine movement that you need for swimming. It's going to combat the things that being on a time trial bike will cause, is that protraction of your shoulders, the depression of your shoulders, all of those kinds of things. So from a triathlete perspective, the rotational torque training is brilliant. From a runner's perspective, it allows you to do more strength training work, but still using all the levers of gait, and to still use one-sided movement, because you're using torque, which is really cool. So from there, we go to the centrifugal force training. Now that's a lot of swinging stuff. So if you think about kettlebells, most of you have probably seen how kettlebells, you swing them around. but very rarely do you swing them in circles like we do with Indian clubs in the centrifugal force training. It uses Indian clubs, and these are kind of like a bowling pin, a little bit longer, and they certainly weigh more than a bowling pin. Some of them do, some of them don't. Some of them are lighter or the same weight as the bowling pin, but it's all about shoulder and thoracic range of motion. It's throwing actions using long levers with a weight on the end. That makes it very difficult to stabilize, and it also makes it really challenging to actually do the movement because it coordinates lots of levers together, which is kind of really fun and really cool. So if you're swinging something and it weighs, let's say it weighs 5 pounds, and it's on the end of a 3-foot lever or a 3-foot limb, 2 feet being your arm and then an extra foot being the length of the Indian club, you're not using a dumbbell to bend it and press it. You're using a long lever to swing it, and the load is way away from you, so it makes it really difficult to actually stabilize from your midsection. So it's a huge core workout. Oh yeah, that's another thing. All of the Sling Method, every exercise you do is a core workout to some degree. So you're really involving your core in everything. Your core, your abdominals, your obliques, your erector spinae muscles, your adductors, your hip flexors, your lats. These are all core muscles. It's not just your six pack, it's not just your rectus abdominis. So this centrifugal force training, swinging Indian clubs around, it's teaching you how to control centrifugal forces by creating a centripetal force, which is an inward pulling force. Now you can't move in gait unless you're creating centripetal forces, and the better you are at controlling centripetal forces, the better you're going to be at controlling your torso movement, your arm swing, your leg swing, all of that. So it just adds to it. It's also really fun. It's a lot of fun. You know, you're swinging these clubs around, doing lots of gait-based movements. It's all good fun. It's all fun, and it all helps you to produce the action of gait. So we're going to kind of finish it off there. So why is the Sling Method different? Because it does nothing that you've done previously. It uses resistance bands, it uses a torque bar. We don't stretch, we MFR. You become your own best myofascial release massage therapist, for want of a better word. You become a postural. If you dig deep into it and you learn stuff and you really pay attention, you'll become a postural expert as well. And then you'll become your own best movement coach because of all the work that goes in with the basic 8. And then there's also the running drills. And these are not running drills that you've seen anywhere else. These are running drills that focus on the movement of gait and the way we want it to be from a kinetic standpoint, not a kinematic standpoint. So an example of that is when I run, my heel kick hits my butt. So therefore I want to train the action of my heel kicking my butt. So we have a butt kick drill. Well, in the Sling Method we don't have a butt kick drill, and there's a reason why. Because that action of the heel kicking the butt, that's not a kinetic action, meaning that the hamstrings are not contracting to pull the heel up to the butt. That is a kinematic. It's what we see, but it isn't a force. It isn't a generation of force from the hamstrings and the calf. It's like a whipping action, but it isn't something that you want to focus on doing. It's not going to make you a better runner. You're not going to get better by kicking your butt with your heels. That's definitely not going to make you a better runner. Okay, so when we do the drills, they're all based on creating a really tightly wound spring, which is going to help you to get off the ground quicker, because we know that runners who spend more time on the ground, they're the ones that generally are getting injured the most, because they're not using their springs and their slings. I love that expression, slings and springs. So if you're learning to use your slings and springs throughout the Sling Method, using the runner's rehab and the basic 8 to get your posture really good, to get your stacking of your joints. Let's change that word posture to stacking of our joints, stacking of our load. And then I can, once I've stacked my load in the right way, in a way that's super efficient and effective and economical, I can then rotate and move really easily, because if my weight, if my bones and everything is all stacked in a way that's really efficient, movement becomes really efficient. I'm not having to control something that's falling to then generate force to move it as well. It's already stacked and controlled. Movement becomes easy, or easier. Okay, so then we take it up a notch. Like I said, there's no stretching. We work on producing force in the action of the gait cycle, and that is a big difference to everything else that's out there. You're actually working on the force that you want to produce in the gait cycle, rather than focusing on squats and deadlifts and military presses and planks, which never occur when you run. So these are forces that don't ever happen when you run, and that's what the Sling Method is all about. And that's why the Sling Method is different, because it focuses on the gait cycle, on the action of running. That is what you must focus on if you want to be a better runner. You're not going to get better at running by doing squats. We've talked about that. We know that the evidence is out there, right? Because running isn't squatting, it's not planking, it's not deadlifting, it's not military pressing, shoulder pressing, lat pulling, pull-ups, chin-ups, bicep curls, push-ups. It's none of that. It's running. That's why the Sling Method works for runners, and the Sling Method for golf works for golfers, because we're working on the actions, the kinetics of golf. Yeah, it's all making sense now. I know it is. So that is Beach Walk Blog 4, why the Sling Method is different. I hope you enjoyed that, and I know that the Sling Method is going to help you, and I'll help you as well. I'm there for you. I want to help you. Talk to you next week. Bye bye.